how we're doing it, and we've got the army, we've got pharmacists, we've got a huge NHS operation, we've got hospital sites, we've got mass vaccination centres. But I think it's reasonable that as soon as we get good regional data, for instance, we should be sharing that as well, and we're going to be publishing as soon as possible. Later this week, we'll be publishing the regional breakdowns, and I can tell you that some of the figures are very interesting. You know, there are parts of the country where they've done incredibly well in, for instance, vaccinating the over 80s. More than 50%, well over 50% now in the northeast and Yorkshire. Less good in some other parts of the country. So we want to be clear about all that. And a crucial thing is that we want the data about those who have been vaccinated in local authorities to be shared, and it will happen by the end of this week, with public health directors in local authorities, because as we go forward, this vaccine programme is going to find that there are people that we need to reach, that we can only reach with the NHS working hand in glove with local government.
I mean, it's my mother's, not that I want to reveal that she's over 80, but she had her vaccine this morning in Surrey, but I have no idea how many other people were vaccinated in Surrey. So I wonder if you could possibly look into whether we could actually release that data by local authority area, because I think it would be very interesting. And just finally, one other bit of data, which is very important, is the wastage, because every person who is not vaccinated because of waste is potentially put in peril. So could we look at publishing wastage rates by vaccination centre, just to encourage everyone to treat each vaccine very preciously?
But we'll try and publish as much data as we can. There's a very important point about wastage, which is that we want to, in this stage when our big constraint is supply of the vaccine, we want to absolutely to minimise waste, and so that's people say, well, why don't you get all of the 9,000, maybe 12,000 community pharmacies to be doing this, because they're fantastic. They're wonderful people. They've got clean premises and so on and so forth. They could do it. The trouble there, and it's very important for people to understand, is logistically you'd have our teams going around dropping off supplies of vaccine in 12,000 outlets or 9,000 outlets, and then at the end of each evening you'd have a proportion that were not used still in the fridge, and the risk is that when we're still constrained by supply, we don't want that happening at this stage. But as we go forward with the rollout, and as I say, as we really dig into those groups that have not yet come forward, don't know how to do it, then I think community pharmacies, which are trusted, well known, will play an important part in the rollout. But on local authority publications, we'll do whatever we can. The moment the plan is for regional breakdown. The regional breakdown is very interesting.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Prime Minister. On the wastage front, my local hospital had targeted NHS workers standing by to use up any spare vaccine at the end of every session, even though they're not officially on the priority list. Other hospitals have not done that, and they have been wasting vaccine. Can we promote best practice? Yes,
and it's perhaps also worth saying that there is a big, or there can be differences in the amount of vaccine that vials, the quantity of vaccine that is necessary to vaccinate a given number of people, depending on the skill of the vaccinator. And that's why in these early stages we really want to maximise the use of people who are very, very proficient in giving the vaccination.
Now we all understand, Prime Minister, that and the committee's asked me to ask these questions, that there are limitations on the vaccine supply, and there is an agreed schedule of delivery. But what steps is the government taking to increase the supply over the agreed schedule, beyond the agreed schedule, so we can accelerate the whole programme?
Well, Sir Bernard, as you know, there's this government has secured a bigger supply of vaccines, I think both absolutely and per head, than virtually any other country in the world. So we have a big stream of vaccines coming down the track. But there is also a programme to accelerate the delivery of the Oxford vaccine. So the remaining Pfizer vaccine is being brought forward. The Moderna vaccine as well. We're doing everything we can to bring forward the manufacturing process as fast as we can, so that we can start getting it into people's arms in the timeliest way.
There has been some concern that it was reported to the Science and Technology Committee this morning. AstraZeneca actually requested that their technicians and production workers should be prioritised for the vaccine, so that they don't suffer the sickness rates that they're suffering at the moment. That would seem important to and critical to the vaccine programme. Could you?
Yes, I mean, you're making an excellent point, and as the committee knows, the JCVI has set up the rankings of 9 groups. We're starting with the first 4 groups by February the 15th. We will, in general, leave the decisions about which groups should be prioritised to the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. I'm sure that's the right thing to do. But clearly, when it comes to the manufacture of the vaccines, there is a critical role for those workers, and that has to be taken into consideration.
And in terms of delivering the programme, the MOD confirmed yesterday they could deploy up to 10,000 people if necessary. So far, only 1/3 of the personnel on standby have been deployed, an additional 10,000. Can you confirm that offer is available to Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland if they're getting behind with their programmes and they need that capacity?
Of course, and I can say that the armed services of the UK are on deployment throughout the UK, as they have been throughout the pandemic, and there are plans to step up the involvement of. They're already embedded at virtually every level, the armed services, in the vaccine rollout programme, but that we will step that up as the distribution campaign accelerates. As I say, at the moment, that's not the constraint.
Well, the NHS England is recruiting new people, re-rolling NHS staff to vaccination programme, and at the moment refusing the offer of the MOD's trained up vaccine quick reaction teams, which would seem to be a sensible use of resource at this particular moment.
Well, that's not my information. I was in a long session yesterday with both the Army and the NHS, and as you know, Brigadier Phil Prosser and others are integrated at the highest level, and the armed services are being of great use. But that will increase as the tempo grows.
But there's a very painful process for a local NHS team to get a MACA request through the NHS system, as we've discovered in Essex once already. Perhaps you can just take that one away.
I'll certainly have a look at that.
On local authorities, and I'm going to come to Clive Betts from the HCLG committee in a moment. We know that local authorities should have been involved in the test and trace programme much earlier, and that was a mistake. So why are NHS England officials, according to many of my colleagues, our colleagues, being instructed not to share information with partners about vaccine locations and things like that, so undermining trust and cooperation when we should all be pulling together in this massive emergency?
Well, you're absolutely right that it's vital that the NHS and local authorities collaborate in this. And I think all colleagues will be familiar with the experience of local friction between the NHS and local authorities. In some cases, we'll have come across that. It's vital that they work together, but also that the NHS shares data about who has been vaccinated and who hasn't. Because, as I say, there will be groups who are hard to reach, particularly from the black and minority ethnic community. Possibly we're seeing some evidence of that, and it is vital that we have strong local community engagement as we go towards the really high numbers that we find everybody who needs a vaccine and encourage them to take it.
Thank you. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the National Audit Office has done a review of the national tracing system and has said that before the call centres were set up to track people who have got COVID and their contacts, there was no business case done, no value for money assessment. Has one been done now?
Well, I think, Clive, the business case for testing, tracking, and tracing is overwhelming, and it's to do with saving lives.
Yeah, but given that the national system is successful in contacting about 60% of the people they're trying to contact, but when the ones they can't contact, the 40% are passed over to local councils, they're contacting 75% or more of those people, a much higher ratio for much less cost. Wouldn't it make sense to transfer more of the responsibility and more of the resources to local councils and directors of public health?
Well, contrary to perhaps to the widespread impression, local councils have been involved from the very beginning, and they've done an outstanding job. But I also think that NHS Test and Trace overall, they've tested, I don't know if the community is aware of it, they've tested 56 million people, or they've conducted, perhaps I should say, put it more accurately, they've conducted 56 million tests. And that is an astonishing number. I believe it's the highest in Europe. And although clearly it's been extremely difficult to control the disease by test and trace alone, it has played an important part. And we would not know some of the vital things we do know about, for instance, the new variant or the South African variant if we weren't doing massive daily genomics thanks to NHS Test and Trace.
Right, but the reality, Prime Minister, is that it's less successful at national level than it is at local level in actually contacting people. So I'm asking for a switch of the programme in that regard. Not that we shouldn't be doing tracking and tracing, but we could do it better at local level. You say that local authorities have been involved from the beginning. That's not their impression. And I want to come on now to the comments you made to Jeremy Hunt and to the chair about local authority involvement in the vaccine programme. The Local Government Chronicle ran a story the other day with the support of local council leaders and directors of public health, saying there was a wall of silence in the NHS. They were getting no data about what was happening with regard to vaccinations in their area. And they need that data, for example, and you just referenced it, to contact particularly hard-to-reach groups, people in the BME community where take-up may be lower, and to get communications out there. But they don't know how many vaccines have been delivered in which parts of their area. Will that change us from next week?
It will change this week. And as I said to Sir Bernard earlier, or I think to Jeremy, by the end of this week, I want public health directors in local government to know who has been vaccinated in their communities. It's going to be essential as we go forward that local authorities know who's been vaccinated and can lead the fight in their areas.
So that would be down to individual data, so that there can be an assessment, say, of clinically extremely vulnerable people who haven't been vaccinated, of care workers who haven't been vaccinated. That detailed information will be available to councils and directors of public health.
That is exactly right.
That's really helpful, Prime Minister. Can I also say, is it now going to be the case that local authorities are going to be involved in the planning of the vaccine rollout programme? They can help with identifying appropriate sites. They can help generally with communications. They can do an awful lot of things working in conjunction. In Sheffield, there is really good working relationships between the council, the CCG and the hospitals. Will that now be enabled to happen by the National Health Service at national level, stop putting blockages in the way of data sharing? Yes,
it will. And my experience is that, obviously it may not be identical across the country, but the examples I've been given of similar to the ones you quote of of local authorities really putting out all the stops to help the NHS to find the sites, to get things going. And you're making a very good point about data. We've got to have that data properly shared. And what I'd be, just to repeat and clarify what I've been assured, is that local authorities will get data about all the people who have been vaccinated by the end of this week. Right. Now, that will obviously need to be continually refreshed and updated.
Of course it will. Just one final point then. Looking to the future, will then information be available to local authorities and to the public about what is going to happen with regard to future sites and future rollout? Just from my own point of view, I was refused information the other day about which sites were going to be open in Sheffield. I was told that I had to go to the top of NHS England for that information to be released. Isn't it, don't we need to take the public into our confidence and give them the information so they can have an awareness of what is happening in their area?
Yes, Clive, I think that the issue there may be that we want to allow the system to make the decision about which sites are going to be used, and then working with local government, working with all the stakeholders together before getting into a public debate or perhaps or argument about it. But there will be a continual expansion. As you know, I think there are about more than 1,000 primary care network operations going on, about 233 hospitals, as I said before, 200 pharmacies, and 50 mass vaccination sites. And clearly, the exact location, for instance, of the mass vaccination sites will be a subject of keen public interest and debate, and it's important to get it right.
It is, but I think the presumption should be, Prime Minister, then, that as much information as possible should be made publicly available as quickly as possible.
I completely agree.
That seems to be a strong consensus, particularly as the Public Accounts Committee learned that the assumption in your programme is that there needs to be 75% take-up of the vaccine to hit the targets. And getting that 75% as the programme progresses is going to get harder and harder unless everybody's cooperating and helping.
Sir Bernard, you put your finger on the point. For the vaccine programme to be as successful as we want it to be, we must ensure that people are encouraged to come forward for testing, and they have every reason to be confident and happy in doing so. And actually, we're seeing some very encouraging data showing that people are more and more enthusiastic about being vaccinated rather than the reverse.
And just very briefly, one word answer required. When will we know whether those vaccinated are safe to let out, that they can't spread the virus? When will we know that the vaccine actually enables people to go back to their daily lives?
Well, I think I can't tell you about transmission yet, but as soon as we have that data, we'll, of course, be publishing it.
Thank you. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Apart from directing these food companies possibly to Specsavers who've been supplying schools with less than proportionate food boxes, will you not just take these companies to task, but given that they've ripped off the taxpayer, make sure that the schools get a refund, but also look at the public guidance that in terms of food to vulnerable children?
Yes, thanks, Rob. You're right to be obviously outraged by the images that we've seen, and the companies in question, or certainly one of the most notorious pictures. The company responsible for that and others have been hauled over the coals, asked to explain how this has happened. They've apologised and they have reimbursed the schools concerned and pledged not to do it again. I should stress that the images did not reflect the actual government guidance, which is for about double the quantity of food for lunch packs for 5 days that you've seen, if not more. But it's vital that people, understand that this government is there to provide support, as we have, an extra 170 million for the COVID winter grant scheme, and £220 million for the holiday activities and food programme, and we're now rolling out again the national free school meal voucher scheme. It's obviously up to schools to decide whether to have use lunch packs or to use a voucher system. Most of them use vouchers. About 75% are distributed through vouchers, and so we've increased the value of the voucher as well.
Okay. We know that school closures potentially will reduce the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and their better off peers by as much as 75%. And that's according to a Department of Education official and the Education Endowment Foundation. We know that mental health problems amongst young people is on the rise, with the Royal Society of Paediatricians reporting a 400% increase since the first lockdown in terms of eating disorders amongst young people, partly caused by school closures and social isolation. So I just want to understand, what specific assessment is the government making of the impact of school closures on children's educational attainment and mental health to inform decision making? Will schools reopen again after the half term? And if it is clear that schools can reopen sooner if we get teachers and support staff up the priority list of vaccinations, isn't this worth doing?
Well, thanks. The priority is if we can achieve what we want to achieve with the vaccination programme. The priority is obviously to get schools open as soon as possible. Whether we can do that after the half-term break in the middle of February, whether we can begin to do that depends on a number of things. It depends on the success of the vaccination programme. It depends on us not finding that, for instance, the South African or the Brazilian variant are immune resistant. It depends on us not finding something else out about the disease that makes us recalculate. I should stress, by the way, that we have no evidence at present to think that these strains are vaccine resistant. Very important for the committee to realise that. We have no evidence that they are vaccine resistant. But that's got to go well. And then the crucial thing is that the overall lockdown measures have got to continue to work. What we're seeing today, as I speak to you, is some early signs of progress in restraining the growth of the virus. Some signs of perhaps of flattening, of levelling off in some parts, but it is far too early for us to say that this means that we can go into any kind of relaxation in the middle of February. We've got to work very hard to achieve that. And in the meantime, the tragedy is for so many kids that they will not get the education that they need. That's why we desperately fought to keep schools open for as long as we possibly could. And I know that was a position that was shared by many colleagues in Parliament. We did everything we could. And what we want to do, just to answer Rob's question about support, you know about the £1 billion catch-up fund. We think the way to address differential learning is through all sorts of techniques, but one-to-one engagement, one-to-one tutorials, we think can be very valuable.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The reason why I ask about that, about the impact assessment on it, particularly on educational attainment, because we know that the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that the poorest students spent less time learning than their richer peers. They've had fewer resources at home to learn effectively. Since September, pupils in areas with lower GCSE attainment and higher levels of disadvantage have missed more days of school than others. And we know that overall truancy rates almost doubled in autumn 2020. So, of course, I welcome the £1 billion catch-up fund. I campaigned for it for many months. But given the extent of what is happening and the potential damage being done to the younger generation, what I'm trying to understand is, what is the educational route map out of coronavirus? And you talked about a long-term plan for social care. Surely we should have a long-term plan for education and skills as well.
Well, we do indeed have a long-term plan, both for education and skills, and to tackle disadvantage in schools in particular. We've got another 2.4 billion that disadvantaged pupils are receiving through the pupil premium. I've mentioned already the sums that we're spending on the holiday activities and food programme, and we are on skills. As you know, we've got a massive programme, a lifetime skills guarantee for everybody who's currently not able to access funding for post 18, post 23 training, and that it's a huge gap in our provision that we're now filling with the lifetime skills guarantee.
Well, it would be good to have a good old-fashioned white paper on that topic, Prime Minister.
We just have to be sure that we're not kicking away the education ladder opportunity for our younger people.
We're running behind. The questions and the answers have got longer. So can I urge my colleagues to ask short questions, and then I can legitimately ask the Prime Minister to be brief in his answers. If his answers are too long, he will just have to stay longer. But thank you, Prime Minister. And we move on to Catherine McKinnell. Petitions.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask you, Prime Minister, about child food poverty and the e-petition launched by Marcus Rashford, I wanted first just to ask you about one of the most popular e-petitions ever submitted to Parliament, which called for Donald Trump to be prevented from making a state visit to the UK in 2017. And given recent events, Prime Minister, do you regret saying in 2018 that Donald Trump was worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize?
I'm sorry. I am in favour of the Prime Minister of the UK having the best possible relationship with the President of the United States, and I had an excellent conversation very recently with President-elect Joe Biden.
OK, well, on the free school meals, I know you've seen the shocking images of half a tomato, half a carrot and half a bag of tuna as part of a 10-day food parcel. And I know you've said you'll put this right. But why do children needing to eat keep taking the government by surprise? Is the Prime Minister not ashamed of being schooled on feeding hungry children by Marcus Rashford?
Well, I talked to Marcus Rashford today, and I think he's doing an excellent job of pointing these issues out, and I said that to him. I think when you look at when you look at the some of these images, they don't reflect the guidance, but it is a scandal and a disgrace, as I've said, that some companies are trying to get away with the provision that they're offering, and we have taken the steps that we have, and I want to see the companies that provide these lunch packs doing so properly, and it's not good enough. There's got to be. You can't assume that households have the supplies of other ingredients to use to make the lunches. You've got that's obvious, and clearly the packages that were on offer were totally woefully inadequate, and that's why we've taken the steps that we have.
I mean, one of the frustrations is the use of these private contracts and the profits that can be made by the middlemen, when really the £15 rather than £5 worth of food should be delivered to children. I mean, the government's handed out billions of pounds on failed COVID contracts, money for unusable face masks, failed test and trace app, COVID testing kits that don't work, yet doesn't seem to trust parents enough to give them the money directly so that they can feed their children. Why won't the government do this?
Well, actually, I'm sure you wouldn't want to inadvertently to mislead anybody, but it's the decision of the schools to decide whether or not to have vouchers or lunch packs. And clearly, as I said earlier on, a majority of the schools, about 75%, use the vouchers. What happens is that the schools sometimes wish to continue to support their caterers, the arrangements that they've made. They think that lunch packs are a better way of doing it. And what we've seen is some people, and it's not all of them, by the way, it's very important to say it's not all of them, some companies have been providing scandalously inadequate lunch packs, and they've now agreed to correct it and to reimburse the schools for their failings.
Well, but Prime Minister, the direct payment to parents is not on offer for those families or for those schools. But isn't it time, more so, that normalising emergency food aid in modern Britain is just deemed unacceptable and undignified? And what is the government's strategy for dealing with this so we don't keep descending into crisis?
Well, actually, what is not normal and what is unprecedented is having to close schools, which we very much don't want to do as a result of the pandemic. And what people have reasonably said is that when kids are forced to stay at home because schools are closed, then those who would normally be in receipt of free school meals should be helped. And that's what we're doing. And it's absolutely right that we do so.
And Prime Minister, I would say it's not just about the closure of schools. We have a food poverty problem in this country, and that is what Marcus Rashford is campaigning on. So I would urge the government to publish a strategy for dealing with this and ensuring that every child can eat. But I wanted to just ask one other question very quickly about hospitality, because we have a petition in Parliament at the moment. And the hospitality industry, it's a major employer in this country, not to mention the heart and soul of many communities, and they have suffered more than most from the COVID disruption. And given we spent 2 days debating in the summer whether a Scotch egg is a substantial meal or not, and dealing with the consequences of the ill-thought-out 10 p.m. curfew, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with petitioners who believe it's time that the government had a dedicated Minister for Hospitality to fully understand the diverse nature of this sector and get things right for this industry through this crisis and beyond? Well,
if I may say so, I think it's very. I think she's right to identify the particular troubles. You're right to identify the troubles of the hospitality sector, and they've been through a very, very difficult time. We're doing everything we can to support them, and the Chancellor, the Business Secretary, and I meet regularly with representatives of that sector. We've given them all the grants, the recent increase in grants that you know of, the recent £3,000 grant specifically for the hospitality sector, on top of the CBILS and the bounce back loans, the furlough scheme, and many, many other forms of support. But the best thing for the hospitality sector is really that we all work together to defeat the virus in the way that I'm absolutely certain we can, with disciplined action and the vaccine rollout, and get them back on their feet. And that I'm sure is the best thing for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Prime Minister. Darren Jones.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, 800,000 people have lost their jobs since February last year, and the Chancellor said it's going to get worse. Why haven't you yet announced the National Jobs and Skills Programme to match the scale of the problem?
There's been a huge programme announced to a £280 billion programme to help people maintain their jobs and livelihoods throughout the pandemic. I mentioned to Rob the lifetime skills guarantee, what we're doing to help people who are moving, Darren, from one. Catherine just mentioned the hospitality sector. It's come under huge pressure. There will be people who will be looking for jobs in other sectors. The lifetime skills guarantee is there to help them. The Kickstart funds, £2 billion Kickstart funds, are there to help particularly young people. And jobs are obviously our focus. But the way to deliver the jobs agenda, as you know, is jabs. And the more we get the vaccine programme, the faster we can do it, the better the employment prospects for the whole country.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've committed.
We're just going to briefly pause our coverage of the Prime Minister's appearance before the Commons Liaison Committee to bring you the latest coronavirus data, because we have significant figures this afternoon. A further 1,564 people have died within 28 days of testing positive for COVID-19. That figure is the highest number of UK deaths reported on a single day since the outbreak began. 1,564 people have died in the last day with coronavirus. That is up from a figure of 1,243 yesterday. In terms of the number of cases, positive cases recorded, that figure today is 47,525, up by just over 2,000 from yesterday when the figure was 45,533. Let's bring in Sky's Milena Veselinovic, who joins us from the newsroom. And that figure in terms of the number of deaths, highest daily figure ever recorded, Milena, is stark indeed.
It's very alarming, Sarah, and it's actually the 15th time that the number of deaths has been above 1,000, and it is a dire situation for the people who have suffered with this illness and all of their friends and family who now mourn them. And there is no doubt that it is a complicated, complex situation across the UK right now. There are 35,000 people suffering with coronavirus in hospitals. Now, that is 70% more than at the peak of the first wave in April. That's what Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, told earlier on today to MPs. He also said that there might be some signs that these restrictions may be giving some results, no doubt prompted by a slightly lower number of cases that we've been seeing in the last 2 or 3 days. But when you're faced with such a high death toll, there's no doubt that we're a long way away from having an exit out of this crisis. Right now, the Prime Minister also said that he would not count out adding some further restrictions if the number of cases doesn't decline fast enough. And in fact, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has today called on the Prime Minister to instigate stricter restrictions. Sadiq Khan has declared a major incident in London last Friday because of the level of numbers of coronavirus patients rushing to London hospitals. He has suggested that, for example, places of worship should be closed as well, the way they were in the first lockdown. As I said, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said that he would consider tougher restrictions if they were necessary. Now, part of the way and the strategy to get out of this situation is also vaccination. And we've heard from the Prime Minister today that there may be 24/7 vaccination centres on the way, he said, as soon as possible. And AstraZeneca, the manufacturer of the Oxford vaccine, said that they would be able to scale up production to about 2 million doses per week by mid-February. But until then, there's a concerning, alarming set of data that we've have seen today. And if you look at the R rate, the R number for the UK, that is the number of people that one infected person passes the virus onto. Now, that's between 1 and 1.4, and that means that for now the outbreak is still growing exponentially, Sarah.
OK, Milena Veselinovic, thanks very much indeed. I'm just looking at some more figures coming into us on vaccinations. And let me see if I can get that figure. The total in the last 24-hour period, there were 47,525 new infections. 1,564 deaths were recorded of people who have died within 28 days of a positive test, and that bringing the total number of people who've died with COVID-19 to 84,767. In terms of that vaccine figure that I was mentioning, 3 million vaccines have been administered so far in the UK. 2.6 million of those are first doses. Let's return now to the Commons Liaison Committee. Boris Johnson answering questions from the chairs of the Commons Select Committee.
I'll study it. But on your point, Stephen, about UC, I take your point. I think that what we want to see is jobs. We want to see people in employment. We want to see the economy bouncing back. And I think most people in this country would rather see a focus on jobs and growth in wages than focusing on welfare. But clearly we have to keep all these things under review.
Even with that increase in universal credit, there has been a huge surge of food bank demand in the pandemic. Do you agree that we ought to be seeing that reversed?
Well, I think that people who help with food banks and set up food banks are doing a wonderful job, and yep. I thank them for it. And in an ideal world, we would be. People would be able to have absolute confidence in getting what they need from their weekly shop, and that's why we're focusing so much on things like the living wage, increasing pay wherever we can, increases in pay for 1 million key workers this year, and doing everything that we can for the poorest and neediest. And don't forget that of the £280 billion that have been spent since the pandemic began on supporting the jobs and livelihoods, the benefit has gone overwhelmingly to the poorest and neediest groups.
Well, there are a lot of people still claiming the old-style benefits, job seekers allowance, employment and support allowance. Their circumstances are identical to people claiming universal credit. The legacy benefit rates were always the same as the UC rates, but they weren't increased by £20 a week. What justification is there for paying them £20 a week less?
Well, we want everybody to move on to universal credit. We think it's a successful system, and I note with some anxiety that it's still the stated policy of the Labour Party to abolish universal credit. I don't think that's the right way forward.
Well, if you take people, for example, with severe disability, they're not allowed to claim universal credit, and yet their benefit hasn't been uprated in line with universal credit. Surely it should be. And if the question about universal credit is resolved at the time of the budget, will the question of those legacy benefit rates be addressed as well at the same time?
We're committed to doing everything we can to address the needs of those on welfare. We believe strongly in universal credit. It's helping. It's putting more money into the pockets of families across the country, particularly with the £1,000 increase. But the best thing is to get people into employment, and that's what we're working for.
Can I raise one final area? We spoke at the liaison committee in May about hard-working, law-abiding families with no recourse to public funds, and you made a point which I very much agreed with, and I quote, you said people who've worked hard for this country, who live and work here, should have support of one kind or another. I think that's absolutely right, but unfortunately that isn't the current policy. It's in my area, it's one of the factors in the spread of the pandemic. People can't stop working because they can't claim social security, so they have to carry on working. Shouldn't this NRPF condition at least be suspended for the duration of the pandemic?
I totally understand the logic of your argument, but the problem is that it's a very, very long-standing provision in this country that NRPF conditions should apply for those, for instance, who are here illegally or unlawfully. And I think that it would be not the right way forward to change that. And what I think we also discussed, Stephen, was just because people have their NRPF, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible for support of many kinds and provided through local councils or otherwise.
No, but they're not able to claim universal credit, and that's what's forcing many people to carry on working. I mean, the current arrangements go back to 2012. We've seen the education department's been helpful, giving people access to free school meals. The housing department has accommodated rough sleepers with no recourse to public funds at public expense. But it's the Home Office, still in a kind of Windrush mindset, which isn't picking up your point about people ought to get support.
Well, I think that's I don't agree with that. And just to go back to the point I was making earlier, NRPF people, I have massive sympathy for them, but they do have access to the coronavirus job protection scheme, to furlough, to funds that the local authorities can make available to help people in particular hardship. £7.2 billion of funding we've made available to local authorities. So this country does not allow people to fall through the cracks, even if they are classified as NRPF. The point you make about UC is a valid one, but I think I've given what I hope are intelligible reasons for why we want to make a distinction between those who are eligible for UC and those who are NRPF.
Thank you, Stephen. We must move on. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Prime Minister, specifically for making domestic abuse so central to your broadcast last week. It was really welcomed by the sector. But can I just ask, what additional protections have been put in place to help victims of domestic abuse who have insecure immigration status?
Well, since the pandemic began, we've done what we can to encourage people who are the victims of domestic abuse to come forward. We set up special helplines. We've been investing, as you know, Caroline, in independent domestic violence advisors. But also it's a condition, although the lockdown rules are very strict, as you know, people, they don't apply to victims of domestic abuse, because we don't think we should stop people from seeking the help that they need.
Indeed, they don't. But is there any specific policies for victims who might be here on a tier 4 or 5 visa, or who might be entirely dependent upon their spouse's status? What specific programmes have been put in place to provide them with the support they need?
Well, they would be the normal support that any victim of domestic abuse has in this country, and we don't tolerate domestic abuse, and we want those who are responsible for it to be found out and punished.
There are some who have fallen through the cracks, and you just said you didn't want anyone to fall through the cracks. Can I ask you about another group of people who've fallen through the cracks, namely those reliant on British Sign Language for their interpretation of the COVID lockdown rules, those who might have learning difficulties? Can I ask, when the Home Secretary says that the current lockdown rules are clear, and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police says that it's preposterous that anyone could be unaware of the rules, why are we still not doing a better job of explaining to vulnerable people what those rules are?
Well, Caroline, thank you. If I may, I've now been asked this a couple of times about sign language in particular. There are obviously various logistical issues that need to be overcome, but I'm going to take that away and see what we can do to increase sign language. But what I can tell you is that the campaigns that we so the normal TV broadcasts, for instance, but the campaigns that we have are available and accessible are provided in accessible formats and translations, and we have multiple media channels that we use to help reach people. The stay-at-home poster, for instance, was produced with a voiceover and British Sign Language interpretation.
And Prime Minister, do you think you could write to us on that subject?
Very happy to do so, yes.
On the 12th of October, you said there hadn't been enough time to get a BSL interpreter for the broadcast then. There wasn't enough time, clearly, last week, and today you're still taking it away. I think it's absolutely shameful that we haven't done better on this when both the Welsh and Scottish governments have. I wanted to ask about access to healthcare during the pandemic. We know that more men than women have been impacted by COVID, but the evidence shows that it's women who are finding access to specific services difficult. I was contacted by a constituent yesterday who was told that her surgery is not currently doing smear tests. What is your response to her when she says, how long is it acceptable for her to have to wait to get her smear test?
Well, obviously I sympathise very much with anybody who's had any service or treatment in the NHS delayed as a result of the pressure on the NHS. And sadly, that's what we are seeing. We're seeing delays in cancer. We're seeing delays in smear tests and vital services that people need. And that's as a result of the increase in the numbers of COVID patients. And that's why we've got to work flat out to get the virus under control and reduce the current wave and give people the service that we need. And what I would say to your constituent is I'm very sorry for the delay that she's experiencing.
Women, especially BAME women, are disproportionately employed in insecure and low-paid work. What specific parts of the Kickstart scheme or the apprenticeship scheme is the government considering to put aside for BAME people and indeed for women who have been disproportionately affected economically by the pandemic?
I can't give you a specific proportion, Karen.
Can I just, on employment, ask a question? Back in November, you made a pledge to make sure that there were more women in Parliament. Is the House of Lords included in Parliament, in your view? And why have we not seen appointments to the Lords increase the number of women, where, of course, you could make a direct difference?
We believe it very much in increasing the numbers of women in every part of our Parliament, and I'm thrilled that that we now, I think, have more female PPSs, for instance, than the male PPSs, and the numbers grow steadily. The Parliament is unrecognisable from what it was like when I was elected, let alone from when Bernard was elected, which wasn't actually that much earlier. And long may that change continue and accelerate. And you ask about the impact of women on COVID, or the impact of COVID on women. I'd just like to point out that in fighting COVID, we've had spectacular female leadership from Kate Bingham of the Vaccine Task Force, from Dido Harding of NHS Test and Trace, and many others.
Women in the Lords, in fact, Prime Minister, where you have failed to put 50% women in either of the two appointment rounds you had. Well,
you're pointing out a very important statistic, and we'll do what we can to address it. But it's not something that's been so far drawn to my attention, but thank you for doing so.
The 50-50 campaign is rather close to my heart, as you understand, Prime Minister, that we get more women into Parliament. And moving to the Home Affairs Select Committee Chair, a prominent woman in Parliament, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister. It's nearly 4 weeks since we were warned about the South Africa variant, but if I still wanted to travel from South Africa here today, I could get a flight via Dubai or Istanbul with no test before I left, no test during, no test on arrival, go straight onto the tube from Heathrow and then onto a train and travel home across the country. You said tough measures were being brought in to protect the country, but why on earth have you allowed this to happen legally for the last 4 weeks?
Sorry, did you say illegally?
Legally. All of this could happen legally. I could get that flight, not be tested, and arrive in the country and go on to public transport. Why is that allowed?
Well, the reason that we've wanted to have a balanced approach in our border policy is obviously you need to make sure that you're balancing the threat to health with the threat to the economy. But passengers from all international destinations are now going to have to produce a negative test result before they arrive in England. And of course, we've gone further and provided additional protection for those coming from South Africa. I will look at the point that you make about the route that you describe.
We know that direct flights aren't enough. In the first wave, there was only 1% of the cases into the country came from China, 63% came from France or Spain. And the pre-travel tests that the Prime Minister referred to, Prime Minister, are very welcome, but other countries brought them in months ago. We're not bringing them in until Friday. Why did you not bring them in November when other countries did?
Well, we've had measures at the border since the 8th of June last year, and actually 3.5 million passengers have been spot checked, and in the last 7 days alone, 30% of all arriving passengers have been checked, and there is a great deal of effort that goes into checking the passenger locator forms that people are obliged to fill in.
Well, we heard this morning, Prime Minister, that those forms are just checked simply to see if people have filled them in. We also heard from Border Force that 90% of cases were not being checked, and we heard there was even less follow-up when people then return across the country, having travelled by public transport. So you've been repeatedly warned about the weaknesses in the quarantine system, a system that we heard experts describe this morning as it might as well be voluntary because so few checks are taking place. Why haven't you strengthened that system? Well,
we have, with respect, strengthened that system, and passengers arriving from all international locations are required to present a negative test before arriving in England.
Well, they will be from Friday, but once again, you could have introduced that testing system from Thursday. You could also have in place testing again on arrival rather than simply 72 hours beforehand. You could have stronger quarantine and stronger checks like very many other countries do. Let me press you on the Brazil issue. We were warned about the Brazil variant 3 days ago. We don't know yet whether that could potentially undermine the vaccination programme. So why aren't you taking immediate action on a precautionary basis?
We are, and we're putting in extra measures to ensure that people coming from Brazil are checked and indeed stopping people coming from Brazil.
So are you? That's been a new announcement. You just told Jeremy Hunt earlier on in this evidence session that you were still looking at this. When are you going to bring those measures?
No, sorry, I said what we were looking at was the question of whether or not the Brazilian variant was immune resistant.
So has a new travel ban been announced on flights from Brazil?
Well, we are taking steps to ensure that we do not see the import of this new variant from Brazil.
But with respect, Prime Minister, what are those steps? Because as of a few hours ago, I understood that it was still possible to get direct flights from Brazil, and also without any testing in place, as of today, Wednesday, 3 days after we've heard about the Brazil variant and nearly 4 weeks after we've heard about the South Africa variant, to arrive without any testing in place.
No, we're taking steps to stop the Brazil variant being imported into this country, as we've taken steps to stop the South African variant from being imported into this country, as indeed the French took steps to stop the Kent variant being imported into France, and that's what countries do.
But Prime Minister, we know that the French system is in place. We know that you have to have PCR tests before you arrive in France. As of today, 4 weeks after we knew about the South Africa variant, no test is required to enter the UK, and it won't be until Friday. As of today, you can't tell me any additional measures that we've put in place. You just keep using the words, we're putting in place stronger measures. But please, tell me what they actually are. I would be very reassured to hear what they actually are.
Well, you'll have to show from all countries that you've got a negative test in order to come to this country.
Okay, that's not until Friday. It's still months later than other countries have done so. And here's the problem, Prime Minister.
Sorry,
we were warned about the border measures back
No, sorry, we had from June, we had a mandatory 10-day quarantine for people coming from countries not on the approved travel corridor list, as you know.
But, Prime Minister, as we heard in the Home Affairs Select Committee this morning, that quarantine system that you introduced in June is so much weaker than other countries. People can still go directly onto public transport. 90% of cases are not checked to even see if they have filled in the forms, and there is very little further follow-up. So that quarantine system, we heard this morning, is simply not working. The problem, Prime Minister, is this. You were warned in the spring about the need for border measures, delayed then. You were warned again now, and we've still got delays in getting the kinds of border measures in place. We still haven't got the system sorted on South Africa and on the Brazil variant. And this is on top of the delays in dealing with lockdowns, dealing with schools and so on. You give the impression each time that you just delay all of the difficult and uncomfortable decisions until the last possible minute. And when so many lives are at stake, Prime Minister, is this really the leadership that we need?
Well, if I may say so, this country has led the world and indeed the whole of Europe in rolling out a vaccine. And one of the things that you don't often hear from commentators on your side of the political divide is that is the case. And I disagree strongly with what you said about the protections we have at UK borders. We're conducting huge quantities of checks. We insist on people going into quarantine when they arrive from non-travel corridor areas. We're putting in measures to protect this country both against the South African variant, the Brazilian variant will continue to be very tough indeed. At the moment, we have a pandemic that is being driven by, in large part, by a new variant that seems to have originated, though obviously we can't be sure, that seems to have originated in a mutation or several mutations in this country, and we're doing everything we can to bear down on that. But if you look at the achievement of this country in fighting the vaccine, I don't think you should neglect the rollout of fighting the virus. I don't think you should roll out the speed of the vaccine program so far.
That was a long question.
We desperately want the vaccine system to work. All of us desperately want it to work. But that's why we need to make sure that
hold that thought.
Like any international variant, please look again at the border measures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. And we're well behind now, I'm afraid. But that was long questions and long answers. So Hilary Benn, as quickly as we can, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
We're moving on to the section about Britain's place in the world post-Brexit.
Yeah.
In December 2019, Prime Minister, you said that there was no question of there being checks on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Do you remember saying that?
I do, and indeed, thanks to the deal that we have, trade is flowing so smoothly, as I said in answer to an earlier question, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that it is now the preferred route of hauliers.
Well, if it's going so smoothly, Prime Minister, why have we seen some empty shelves in supermarkets in Northern Ireland? Why has the Northern Ireland Agriculture Minister warned that a range of frozen and chilled foods could be unavailable after the temporary grace period ends? And why did the big supermarkets write to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster this week to call for urgent intervention to prevent further disruption if it's all going so well?
Well, if you listen to what the supermarkets are actually saying today, I believe that Andrew Opie of the Retail Association said that supply was pretty much back to normal for supermarkets in Northern Ireland.
But what the supermarkets have warned about is what may happen if the grace period, let's take the 3-month grace period that ends at the end of March, during which they don't have to provide export health certificates for all of the food and agri-food products that they're transporting into Northern Ireland, they're warning about what happens if that is not extended. Now, you can give us a simple reassurance if that's possible today. Can you guarantee both those supermarkets and shoppers in Northern Ireland that the grace period will be extended after the end of March?
What I can certainly guarantee is that if there are serious problems in victualling or supplying supermarkets in Northern Ireland because of some piece of bureaucracy that's misapplied, then we will simply exercise Article 16 of the protocol, because it's absurd that there should be such difficulties, and we will make sure that supplies continue. It just goes without saying that any difficulties that remain will naturally fall away anyway, because the people of Northern Ireland have to vote to retain the protocol in 4 years' time.
Well, Prime Minister, it's not misapplied bureaucracy. It is the very essence of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which you negotiated. Turning to something else you said, many times you've referred to the UK gaining control of our waters. Why is it that some of the Scottish fishing fleet is currently tied up rather than out fishing? Well,
I understand very much the frustrations of people who are fishing community and Scottish fishermen and women who are facing what I believe are temporary frustrations insofar as there are delays caused by a variety of problems. We will compensate those fishing businesses, but there is a massive opportunity for for Scotland and for the whole of the UK with the increase in quota that we get from the deal, 25% before the end of the transition period, hundreds of thousands of tons more fish, and the ability to fish all the fish in Scottish waters from the end of that period.
So are you telling us today that you think those difficulties, because they can't get their product to market in time, are only temporary?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
I believe that's right, yes.
You do, right. But isn't it the case that red tape, cost and bureaucracy was the inevitable consequence of the trade agreement that you've negotiated with the EU? One freight expert has described a mountain of red tape brought in on the 1st of January. Isn't that the consequence of leaving the single market and the customs union? This is just a fact, is it not?
If I may say so, Mr. Ben, that's not compatible with what we're seeing with the volumes of traffic at the moment from GB to NI. And as I say, I think one of the extraordinary things about the 1st of January was that it did not produce the disruption that people claimed that it would. I don't doubt that there will be problems, and businesses must prepare for change. Things will be different, and you have to get the right forms. You have to be conscious of the certificates that you need. But I believe that all that is can be readily done. And overall, as I say, the traffic at the moment is smooth, and there are, as far as I know, no queues, and we will address all issues as fast as we can.
Thank you. Just one final, very brief question. Is it true that the UK rejected an offer from the European Union during the negotiations for a 90-day visa-free period for UK musicians who wanted to go and tour in Europe?
No, that's not true. My understanding is that
so it wasn't offered.
No, we wanted to have reciprocal rights for musicians to tour, but before everybody worries about this, I should just stress that what we have is the right for UK musicians to go and play in other European countries, in EU countries, for 90 out of 180 days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ben. Admirably brief, both of you. Pete Wishart. We can't hear Pete Wishart.
Pete, you need to unmute. Pete, you need to unmute.
Pete, we can't hear you.
Pete, you need to unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Start
Sorry
again.
about that.
Start again.
Well, can I start, I think, on a note of agreement? And I'm pretty sure that you and I, Prime Minister, are both Democrats, and we both believe that in a parliamentary democracy, a majority should be respected. So therefore, can you tell me, if a majority of the Scottish people want their country to be an independent nation, how do they democratically achieve that objective?
Well, Pete, let me tell you that what I think that they should do is hold a referendum, such as the one that was held in 2014. And when they say that to the people of that country, and indeed all of the UK, that that's a once-in-a-generation event, which is what they said, that they should, in a democratic spirit, honour that pledge.
Well, can we unpack just a couple of these things? Because, again, that's just an utter load of rubbish. There was nothing in any of the legal texts about once in a generation. There's two legal texts, the Edinburgh Agreement and the Smith Commission. There is no mention whatsoever of once in a generation. And if they want to use rhetorical flourishing, Prime Minister, I think that you said if it was a Brexit extension, you would be dead in a ditch. Well, you're sitting in front of us and that ditch is still unoccupied. So surely, once again, if the Scottish people want to achieve independence, how is that democratically achieved? Well, what's the answer?
Pete, with great respect, I've given you my answer. That as far as I can see, the Brexit extension has come and gone. We're out of the EU. Scottish fishermen, fishing businesses have access to unparalleled marine wealth in the course of the next few years. I hope they exploit it. I hope that the SNP isn't so deranged as to hand back control of our fisheries to the EU. And I remember distinctly Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon saying that it was a once-in-a-generation event. But did you not hear them say that?
We've just answered. There's no way in any legal text about once in a generation.
Did you say that? Did they say that?
Because you're not answering this question, are you seriously saying that democracy in Scotland doesn't matter and that a majority should be respected? I can only think of one other sort of world leader that would deny democracy like that, and he's currently sitting in the White House. Are you seriously saying to the Scottish people that their democracy doesn't count and don't ignore it?
I think you need to ask yourself whether you're seriously saying that right now, in the middle of a pandemic, whether the people of Scotland or the UK or anywhere think it's sensible to have a referendum on a constitutional issue when we're trying to, as we discussed earlier, to get the pandemic down, to generate millions of jobs that we're going to need over the next few years to allow this whole country to bounce back together. I think that's what the people of this country want to focus on. I think it's incredible that the Scottish National Party is focusing on a referendum. When you can't say, by the way, what you want this referendum to discuss. You can't say what the prospectus is for the destruction of the United Kingdom. Do you want to scrap the army, scrap the pound, scrap the Queen, scrap the bomb? What is it? What is it? You can't say what your agenda is. All you can say is that you want to break up the UK in some way. And I think that the people of this country, want to focus on fighting COVID and getting on with building back better together.
And said that.
Mr. Wishart?
I've got a very elegant solution for that, Prime Minister. Let's have a referendum, not now when there's a pandemic, but in the first part of our next parliamentary Scottish term. Let's have a referendum. You put that case to the Scottish people. You'll put the case why we believe that Scotland should be an independent nation, and let the people decide. That's what the Scottish people want. There are 17 opinion polls now showing that a majority in Scotland want an independence referendum. You know, Prime Minister, I know, everybody watching this knows that a referendum is coming. Why on earth don't you just get on with it? Why don't we have this referendum? Let the Scottish people choose. If your global Brexit Britain is so wonderful, they'll vote for that. If they agree with us that we should be an independent nation, they'll vote for that. Why can't we just get on and do it?
Well, because we had a referendum on the issue in 2014, which senior members of your party, perhaps not you, said was a once-in-a-generation event. It was on that basis that people voted in the way that they did, very substantially, to keep our wonderful union together. And if you look at and I think people want to focus on fighting the pandemic. And I think, by the way, one of the weirdest things I've heard in the last couple of days is that the Scottish Nationalist Party is so averse to any Scottish National Party is so averse
continually told off about that.
is so averse to anything that comes from England that I'm told you won't even use the word Oxford vaccine. Perhaps you'd like to say something in favour of the Oxford vaccine.
Look, I'll tell you what I'll say to you, Prime Minister. Your response to these questions just demonstrate the pitiful state that the Scottish Conservatives are in just now. You're prepared to deny us democracy. You mentioned rubbish about Oxford vaccines. What the Scottish people want is a say in the future. They're hearing you saying that you're not prepared to give that. I don't even know why you're bothering standing in the next Scottish election. Surely you know continuing to say no to Scotland is unsustainable and there will be another referendum.
I think what people in this country, across this country, want in Scotland and elsewhere is for us to focus on their needs. And from where I sit, I see the Scottish National Party, and whether you're nationalist or not, it's a matter for you. I would say by any definition of that word you were. You see them failing on crime, failing on education, failing on tax, and with nothing to say except that you want to break up the United Kingdom. That's all you've got to say. And what you won't say is what the purpose of the referendum is. You won't say whether you want to keep the pound, what will happen to pensions. You won't say what will happen to the diplomatic service, the security services, the military, the monarchy. You won't say anything about it. All you will say is that you want a referendum, and you had one in 2014, and the result was decisive, as I think SNP leaders said in 2014.
Let's have that referendum and let the people decide.
On what? On what?
On the future of Scotland. The Scottish people want to be an independent nation. Let them decide.
I think you've got to explain what you mean by that.
Thank you.
It's quite simple, Prime Minister.
Last question.
You put a proposition for the union, we'll put a proposition for independence, we'll let the Scottish people choose and decide. Whatever outcome they decide is what will happen. It's very straightforward. You did it with Brexit. If you can have your democracy in Brexit, why can the Scottish people not have their democracy about their constitutional future?
Anyway, I don't think that's I think what people want to focus on now is addressing this pandemic. I think that the last thing this country needs is to wrap itself into years of constitutional wrangling on a prospectus that, from that account, was very, very unclear.
Moving on, Northern Ireland Committee Chair Simon Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. There was huge relief when the protocol was agreed and signed off. Talk of invoking Article 16 should, I suggest, be avoided at all cost. It would do huge damage to the Good Friday Agreement, as you're aware, and also give damage to the relationship between our country and the United States. But it does seem to us, and certainly evidence that we've taken in the committee, that there needs to be a significant piece of work across agencies of government, including, but not in totality, the Northern Ireland Office, the Northern Ireland Executive, Treasury HMRC, DEFRA, BEIS, Cabinet Office, DFT and the Republic, in order to make sure that exporters to Northern Ireland know the rules because they want to conform to them. I think you're right to say that trade is starting to get back to a certain degree of normalcy, but we need a huge education campaign amongst GB-based businesses so that they know what it is they need to do both in the grace period and afterwards. So what assurance can you give us that the Joint Committee is going to use the grace period, i.e. between now and the 31st of March, in order to ensure that all of the creases are ironed out, rather than having a cliff edge at the end of March, where we see some of the current disruption continuing unnecessarily?
Well, thanks very much, Simon, and thanks for what you've said about the operation of the protocol. I think, as I said to an earlier question, it's inevitable that there's going to be teething problems when you have a change as substantial as the one that we've just had. The UK now controls its borders, its laws. We can do free trade deals around the world. We control our waters. We have substantial sums of cash that we now have available that we didn't have before, and we need to get on and make the most of it. We've also got to make sure that we minimise the impacts on business, and so the Trader Support Service is going to be ramped up, and I'm told that since the 1st of January, 95% of the online declarations that you have to make are done within completed and processed within 15 minutes. And as I say, the volumes remain significantly higher going GB-NI than on GB Ireland routes. That may change as we go forward and further pressures emerge, but we'll do our best to iron them all out.
Thank you. I mean, certainly our understanding is that capacity at the ports, both GB and Northern Ireland, is sufficient, that there is plenty of capacity and infrastructure there. It is just this lack of confidence, if you will, between British businesses exporting to the UK, to NI, which is leading a lot of people to say, well, we won't bother, we want to see greater clarity, and that does need to be addressed very quickly. So I just hope that the Joint Committee will very proactively and energetically pull together all of those agencies of government to make sure that our exporters have got the best opportunity, because the risk has to be, does it not, that producers in the Republic will say, let's trade north-south far more, and that would be a disadvantage to GB-based business.
Completely right. And that's why it's so important, for instance, that we sort out the business of chilled meats, and the great British banger gets through in the way that it should and will. All these problems, if individually, are I believe capable of speedy resolution.
Thank you. Can I take you back to your previous department at the Foreign Office? And you'll be aware of the FCO commissioned report by William Shawcross into Gaddafi-enabled IRA terrorism. William Shawcross has submitted his report to the Foreign Office many months ago, and silence has been the response from the FCO. There are continuing talks within the United Nations of campaigns to defrost, if you will, frozen Libyan assets, some of which are held in the UK. Can you ask the Foreign Secretary to get a wiggle on, if you will, to publish the Shawcross report and set out how the government is going to respond to this very important issue, which has dragged on, I'm sure you'll agree, for far too long?
Well, I'm very grateful to William Shawcross for what he's done and the effort that he's gone to in solving a very difficult problem. This is the potential for compensation from Libyan funds for victims of IRA terrorism whose injuries or who were killed as a result of Semtex or other weapons supplied by Libya. There are many great difficulties with trying to get a satisfactory solution. It's proved extremely difficult to draw the right net or to decide exactly who might be eligible for these funds, and there's a great deal of controversy surrounding that. It's also extremely difficult to find a way, given the current precarious situation in Libya, of extracting the funds. And as I can see, Jeremy, my successor, will know very well that Libya, as Foreign Secretary, will know very well that Libya is basically totally divided state at the moment. There are some faint signs of progress, but until we have a government that we can really work with in Libya, it's difficult to make progress on unfreezing assets or any of the other things that you described. So William Shawcross's work is valuable. I think it's very, very important. It's particularly important for families in Northern Ireland, but we are, I'm afraid, some way off having the result that we might hope for. And I've got to be honest with you, Simon, it will be very, very tough to get any kind of equitable solution out of this disaster. Other countries, many years ago, particularly the United States, were able to get compensation for victims of Libyan terrorism in the way that the British state did not. We've been trying to rectify what I think was an omission. It's proving extremely difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you. Prime Minister, we're pushing past 5 o'clock. We would be extremely grateful if you could give us a little bit more time.
Very happy to do so.
For Sir William Cash, Tom Tugendhat and Philip Dunn, and some quick-fire questions at the end. Sir William Cash.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Just to start off with, you led us through the last year, from early December last year, from parliamentary paralysis into a position in which we not only had a general election, which had a massive majority for the Conservative Party, but also to take us out of EU jurisdiction and the European Court of Justice, and reasserting our sovereignty in a very important and vital way for the future of this country. We heard today, both in Prime Minister's questions and also in the urgent question that was put to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, a lot of discussion, quite understandably, regarding the question of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is an immensely important issue, but I think you have already indicated that there are some challenges and that they are being met. What Andrew Opie said today, and what, in fact, the director of the CBI in Northern Ireland said on the Today programme this morning, all indicated that although there are challenges and there are some difficulties in relation to all these questions in Northern Ireland, the protocol, that actually, given the fact that we're in the process of COVID, there are a number of very significant responses to those challenges going on. Could you enlarge on that a bit so that people can get a better idea as to, for example, how we're going to improve the transparency in the Joint Committee, which of course is primarily the responsibility of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, because in the European Scrutiny Committee, we're working flat out on all these things. And we just want to be quite sure, not only that we're going to meet the challenges, but we're also going to have the transparency within that committee to make sure that we can ask the right questions and get the right answers.
Thanks very much, Bill, and thanks for everything that you've done to make this possible. I think that the situation in GBNI trade, as I was discussing just now with Simon, is far better than some people had perhaps expected. Things are much smoother. There are some problems, and in the interest of transparency, sales of second-hand vehicles, we've sorted that out now with a compensation scheme for second-hand cars sold in Northern Ireland, so they don't pay additional VAT. So we've solved that one. We've got one on seed potatoes as opposed to ware potatoes. And as you know, there are sanitary and phytosanitary issues about the export of seed potatoes from this country to the EU. We're solving that, though the export of seed potatoes is very, very small from the UK to the EU. I think we export as many to the whole of the EU as we export to Egypt in terms of seed potatoes. There's the question of pet passports, but we have I believe, a way of solving that. There's the chilled meats issue that I've already referred to, and one or two others. They are by and large small, soluble questions, which one by one we are addressing. And the Maros Sefcovic and the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster, I think, have done a fantastic job in the Joint Committee of addressing them and building that confidence in trade, NIGB, GB, NI. It's incredibly light touch insofar as we have to do any checks at all, and it is working well. The key point is that insofar if there are further problems that really, or if the EU or our partners insist on an interpretation of the protocol that we think is unfair or unnecessary, then Article 16, of course, exists to address that. And the whole thing falls away unless the people of Northern Ireland actually vote to continue with the arrangements. So I see, in the meantime, Northern Ireland is part of the UK customs territory, does free trade deals with us around the world, and there is unfettered access for NI goods to GB and for GB to NI with the very small caveats that I've entered, and we are working now to reduce them the whole time. So I believe that businesses, both north and south of the border in Ireland, but also businesses east-west, can be full of confidence about the future. I think Northern Ireland has a massive opportunity to exploit the advantages it has.
Thank you very much. And if I might just finish my point by saying that there are obviously some challenges. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster made that clear this morning. You said it in Prime Minister's questions. You've said it again now. And I don't think I have anything further to add at this stage because we're running short of time. And I think the chairman would probably be quite glad if we could move on to the next person.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian. Yes, I gave a long answer about seed potatoes.
And
but there are a few other issues, but we will fix them.
And hopefully they can be fixed through the Joint Committee rather than resorting to Article 16.
Yes, that's the last resort.
Thank you. Now the Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Philip Dunn will no doubt cover COP26. So leaving the environment aside, what are your priorities for the G7 that we're hosting this year?
Building back better together. And if you look at the pandemic, I think that it caught the international system totally unprepared in all sorts of ways, and we need to work together on preparing for pandemics in the future. Discussing, Yvette and I were talking about borders and quarantine. There is no international consensus about how this should operate. It was a complete. Everybody took a different approach. There's no international consensus about how to dispense vaccines. There are no agreements about some of the about lockdown measures, about PPE. The global system basically failed to match the demands of the time, and it was a kind of it was a sauve-qui-peut environment. So we want to build back. We want to work together, and one of the things we're looking at is the possibility of a treaty on pandemics, working together to create jobs for our electorates across the whole of the G7 area. That will be one of the key focus, and global free trade will clearly be important. Thinking about China will be important in how we as G7 respond to the challenges posed by China and many other issues.
Can I push you on the China element? You've spoken in the past that your mattress will monitor your nightmares. Given how much data is flowing east and the fact that the Politburo in Beijing has updated Ricardo and Smith by adding data to one of the factors of production, will you commit to putting privacy on the agenda of the G7 to protect British people from intrusions into their privacy?
Yes. Look, I want to stress that when I talk about the challenges of China, it's important that we, and I know you lead this the China Research Group in Parliament, and we should be vigilant. We should. I think that Dom Raab gave a terrific speech about the Uyghurs and what's happening there, and I think the policy there is completely right. But I don't want us to, and I think we've got to be very vigilant about what's happening with our critical national infrastructure and about the protection of our data and our cyberspace, and we're taking more measures to do that. But I don't want this country or this government to lurch into a position of sort of unthinking Sinophobia. I don't believe that'd be right for the UK. I think that there's a balance to be struck.
I think everybody supports you on that, but you'll remember that just after the war, our country was one of many that set up the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade to resist the soft encroachment of Comintern, the Soviet bloc. Would you commit to looking to create a general agreement on data for democracies to share the ability to harvest large amounts of data and work with it, but in a way that respects the privacy and freedoms of free peoples?
Yeah, we're looking at all that kind of thing, particularly on data, not just in the context of the G7, but also of the D10. So if you add the Australia, India, South Korea to the G7, you have some of the major democratic countries of the world coming together, and issues about privacy and data are certainly ones that we want to explore together, as well as technological issues.
Prime Minister, you've demonstrated the use of social media in the UK quite effectively. Are you comfortable with the fact that a US company controls how you communicate with your electorate, or do you think that the media rules that affect ownership of newspapers and TV stations should also affect your ability to communicate with your 3 million followers?
I do think there's a real debate now to be had about the status of the internet, the big internet companies, whether they should be identified as mere platforms or as publishers, because when you start editorializing, then you're in a different world, and that's why we're bringing forward, as you know, our measures, our white paper on online harms, because it's time we had a frank conversation about the boundaries that we want to be set, and the role of these companies in what they choose to publish and what they choose not to publish.
Well, I'm interested to hear that you agree with, or at least appear to agree with Chancellor Merkel on elements of your concern there. Do you also agree with her on the European Investment Treaty that's just been signed? And do you also agree with the Chinese government that the mass sterilization of Uyghur Muslims is a form of gender empowerment? Well,
on your first point about the EU China deal, it's something that obviously that we'll be studying. I think it's very important that I want a world in which we're able to have good relations with China, where we're able to interact freely with China. We speak frankly to China, and so on the Uyghurs, I'm with the point that was made by the Foreign Secretary yesterday. I support what Dom Raab had to say, but speaking frankly and calling out human rights abuses should not stop us from having a productive relationship where that is possible. And I think that's what the British people want us to see.
Last question, Mr. Chairman.
One last question, if I may, which is that Huawei's Chinese employees have either been recalled to China or have been forced to leave the company when they've been expatriates based in Europe and have married a European. This is the action normally seen in people working for a government or an intelligence agency. Does this confirm the concerns that many of us have had that Huawei isn't really a free company, but is actually just a branch of the Ministry of State Security and a branch of the Chinese state?
Well, the decisions that we've had to take about our critical national infrastructure obviously reflect concerns that I think you and I share about the potential for the Chinese state to get inside parts of our systems, our internet systems, our security networks that we wouldn't want to see. And so we've had to take some tough decisions, some technologically difficult decisions, and some expensive decisions, I might say. And the challenge for us as the West and as the D10 or indeed the G7 is really to come up with the technological alternatives. And I think it's one thing to say, well, we're going to exclude X or Y company, but what we really want to see is us as liberal democracies working together to produce the alternative. And that applies not just to technology, but also to our relations with Africa and many other parts of the world.
Well, there you go. You're selling the general agreement on data back to me. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Very good. Now we turn to the Chair of the Environment Audit Committee, Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Ministers, Tom has just mentioned I'm going to touch on COP26 and also on greening and recovery, and I believe Darren Jones may want to come in on the back of the COP26 questions, if there's time. In November, we will be hosting the largest international conference ever held in this country on the most important topic of this century. It's a real opportunity for you to showcase global Britain leading the world in responding to climate change. You appointed a full-time president this month, which reflects a call that I made last year, so that's very welcome. Alok Sharma keeps his seat in the cabinet without portfolio. You may remember when you were mayor of London, that Jeremy Hunt, who was then Minister for the Olympics, answered questions in the House on UK preparations for London 2012. Will the COP26 president be subject to similar scrutiny from members on his preparations for the Glasgow summit?
Indeed.
That was straightforward.
You've also acknowledged in PMQs today that good scrutiny makes for good government. And at present, the only parliamentarians to be included in the UK delegation to COP26 are ministers. So as head of the UK delegation, will you demonstrate the importance of proper scrutiny by inviting chairs and possibly members of the relevant select committees to join the UK delegation to Glasgow?
Well, Philip, I'll take that away and look at that. Are you volunteering?
Yes, I'm sure Darren is too, and there may be others.
Okay, right. Well, let me say then that let me give you a warm welcome in the sense that I'm sure that your contributions and Darren's contribution will be very useful to what the UK has to say at COP. But I don't necessarily wish to allocate places on this or that committee or delegation right now.
Okay, and just finally on COP, there are also, as you know, right across the country, large numbers of climate change activist groups springing up to try and see what their local community can do. It would be really helpful, I think, to spreading the message and developing the best practice ideas, not just for this country, but across the world, if there could be a forum for those groups to input ahead of COP26 as well. Would you be prepared to encourage Alok Sharma to facilitate that? Yes, and
I want to be the widest possible engagement with NGOs of all kinds, with civil society, everybody who has a stake in this, and I see no reason why there shouldn't be a real festival of ideas in the run-up to COP. And I know that Alok and his team are very keen on that, and we'll be seeing what kind of whether it's feasible in Glasgow in November to have some kind of a fringe because I think the appetite will be huge, and we'll have to work out how to manage it.
Well, that's fantastic.
Can I just bring in Darren Jones at that point?
Can I come back on my other?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, my committee is leading the parliamentary scrutiny of the delivery of COP26. Many have called, as we've just heard, for an Olympic Games-style energy from you personally as Prime Minister to ensure that the UK's leadership of COP26 is as successful as the French leadership of COP25. Can I just ask, are you personally interested in COP? And if so, what is it that you personally want to secure as Britain's headline achievement of running COP26?
Thank you, Darren. Well, there are two things. I personally, I'm becoming more and more obsessed with what we can do, because for me, to get back to the point I was making to Tom Tugendhat about bouncing back from COVID, the green agenda, the whole green industrial revolution is not just a load of green nonsense, as people sometimes seem to suggest, extra costs for businesses and for families. If you do it right, it's the opportunity to generate hundreds of thousands of jobs for this country. And we've discussed that earlier. You said to me, your first question was, what about a charter for jobs? This is a charter for jobs. Literally hundreds of thousands of jobs in wind technology, in batteries, in low carbon campaigns of all kinds. And so in getting to net zero by 2050, which is the #1 objective of COP, and getting the world to agree to that, we have the opportunity to turbocharge our economy at the same time, and to drive jobs of all kinds. And so that's where I come at. But there's a second thing, and that's biodiversity. And it is an absolute tragedy today that we are massacring the species of our planet. We've lost about 500 in the last century. We're losing them at an absolutely unconscionable rate. We're losing habitat where the human beings are engulfing and destroying the natural world. And we won't get the climate in balance again. We won't solve climate change until we address our relationship with the natural world. So I want the second big thing, in addition to net zero, by 2050, and getting as many countries. So that's a big goal. And since we last spoke, I was last before this committee, lots of countries that we thought would be difficult have been coming forward with commitments to net zero. So we're already seeing, Darren, we're seeing even before the year has scarcely begun, we're seeing an enormous amount of progress. But the second thing I want to see is on biodiversity. I want to see the world committing in the way that we did at Kyoto. They committed to these Aichi targets, if you remember, to protect habitats and species. We want to give meaning to that now. We want countries to commit solidly and formally to stopping the destruction of animals, of wildlife, of habitat, of forests in the way that they are.
Mr. Jones?
Just to be precise, Prime Minister, because biodiversity is COP15 chaired by China, not
yes, but I understand that, but we intend to follow up with a biodiversity. The coming package will be great, but we intend to use COP26 to stress the importance of biodiversity as well.
Very good, but you said you want to get every country in the world to agree to net zero by 2050. That's your ambition, right?
Well, I think at the moment we have countries accounting for about 62% of the population of the world have made a pledge to net zero, which is great. China, as you know, is going for net zero by 2060, which is the biggest development since I last appeared before your committee. But other countries are now coming through with net zero by 2050, and it's actually very exciting to see the way that a global consensus is starting to build, and that the role of the UK the role of the UK presidency of the COP is to get as many countries as possible to share in that. And even before COP has begun, we're starting to see, before our presidency began, we're starting to see progress in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And is there a possibility we'll have a non-fossil fuel treaty?
Well, the Kyoto Protocol was intended to reduce on climate change, was intended to reduce fossil fuel output. That's the whole point of it. And so is the Paris Agreement of 2015, and that's what we're trying to do.
And back to Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I was very interested in what you were saying about biodiversity. Our committee was discussing this with the ministerial team this morning, and we've not met a single one of the Aichi 10-year targets. So we're really looking to make proper progress in the next 10 years. But I wanted to raise one quick point about the greening the recovery. So as part of the flagship programme introduced in the summer, partly to help meet net zero targets, but also support jobs, was the Green Homes Grant Scheme. And we've been looking at this. And the tragedy is that the very short-term nature of this scheme is regrettably having precisely the opposite effect to what was intended, with firms informing builders and installers informing my committee that it's led them to actually laying off staff. So a couple of examples. One award-winning company had a full order book before the grant was announced, now without a single voucher.
Well, we're going to leave questions to the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee. It's been going on for some 2 hours now, and we're going across to Washington and to a building that was under attack this time last week and is about to make history again.